Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of Women in Retail Talks. In today's episode, we're excited to share a presentation from this year's Girl Talks West event, featuring Sukhinder Sakasity, founder and CEO of Joyus, a startup that aims to enhance the shopper experience by helping shoppers find products through short-term video. Listen in for key tips on how you can join your first corporate board and enhance your leadership skills. And now, on to the show.
I titled this speech, 6 Essential Questions to Answer in Your Personal Leadership Journey. Okay, so first of all, why all the fuss? Is the boardroom the right place for women, more specifically you, right? So I think this is actually a pretty salient question because lots of people are like, should I want to be on a board? I mean, there's a sort of presumption that you have to want to be on a board, and I think for a lot of people there's a bit of a mystique about being on a board, but I think most of all it's sort of like, why is it relevant, and is it something you should be thinking about? The way I think about that question is really thinking about what does a board bring you to your everyday life or to your career journey that you wouldn't otherwise get? So for those of you who are on boards, what has it brought to you? I think when you think about, is a board right for everyone, first of all, as people know, it's a actually pretty significant time commitment. Public boards and private boards have different time requirements, but just so you guys can sort of frame it, let's talk nonprofit, private, and public. Nonprofit, they'll take as much help as you can give them, because really the ability to bring business skills to a nonprofit is pretty valuable. The other thing to note about a nonprofit board is if you're on any kind of nonprofit board, there is an expectation that you help raise money. So nonprofit boards typically have, I think the benefit is they're mission driven, and it's a great way for you to connect with a cause that you care about and contribute and learn what a boardroom looks like, because I think that's one of the great things about nonprofits. But I think just keep in mind that the goal is really fundraising, and they'll take as much business help as you can give them. Private companies, I think what people, and I speak specifically to tech companies because that's where I spent all of my private time in private boardrooms. I would say once again, a private company board is time consuming in a very different way than a public company board. The way it's time consuming is you're not spending as much time on governance and audit committee and regulatory requirements. You're spending more time actually in the nuts and bolts of the strategy of the business, the strategy and the execution of the business. So to some degree, I think it's actually a very fun place to be if you like thinking about hard problems, right? I think the thing I would say about a private board, again, particularly tech, is once again, the founder's going to take as much as you can possibly give him. So private boards, or why do I say him? Him and her. I mean, my God, like this tells you something about where we all live and kind of where we still need to go. But I think, regardless if it's a him or a her, the point really is that in a private company board, lots of fun, I think, strategic, operational questions. You get to use a pretty full range of your ability. Challenge, again, is pretty time-consuming because a founder will take as much time as you can give them. And then the public company board, people always talk about the weight of a public company board, and that's really driven by, you have a set of governance requirements by the SEC and other things, so there's a lot of fiduciary responsibility to look at things like the quarterly earnings or releases or issues of succession. And then weaved into that, of course, is also the ability to influence strategy. And that's actually, the time commitments there are really driven by where the board is located and whether it's 4 or 8 board meetings a year. So I sit on the board at Ericsson, and I go to Stockholm 4 times a year. And that doesn't sound like much, but by the time you add all the travel time, and then in between I'm on the remuneration committee, so I have another 4 times a year that I'm on a phone call, you're looking at a good 20 days a year that I am dedicating to board service outside of my own company. And so that's the way to think about the time commitment. So just to recap on this point before we go to the next one, why serve? It's really about networking. It's about perspective outside of your day job, and it's about feeling like you can contribute to something bigger, right? I think the perspective piece is actually most important to your career. When you think about your day job, I will tell you the most interesting thing about being on a board is stepping out of your day-to-day role and understanding how it might look to be judging marketing if you're a marketer when you're sitting in the CEO seats or the board seat. So I think it really does give you a perspective even on the function you're running, right? As well as a perspective of like life outside your function and what does that really look like and what are the issues worth dealing with. So I'm going to go quicker because I know we're tight on time. How do you know if you're qualified? It's the key one. So how many of you are waiting for the tap on the shoulder? It tells you you're qualified. My gut is women more than men are waiting for somebody to tell them they're qualified, right? And more often than not, men presume they're qualified, and women often don't. And I always chuckle by this because I always say that if you're a woman and you think you're qualified, you probably are. If you're a man and you think you're qualified, not so sure. But generally speaking, by the time women think they're qualified, they actually are qualified for most intents and purposes. But to be specific here, when you ask the question, I will say to people, you know if you're qualified if you think you have a point of view that is valuable on strategy to a CEO, right? So I think it takes more than just executional prowess to get on a board, right? So you have to be able to bring a perspective that is strategic. So if you feel like your day job as the CMO of a retail company or a director of acquisition or retention marketing gives you a unique perspective, there is a CEO for whom that perspective may be strategic, right? That's how you know where you fit and if you're qualified. Now, if you can't think of where you have a strategic perspective to add, I would say you may not be ready for the boardroom. So that's one of the ways to start thinking about where do you know where is your knowledge at such a level that it is strategic to someone else? That's where you're going to find your best board fit, right? And I think this is one of the critical things. So what are boards looking for? Where is all the demand? I can only tell you what we see in the board list, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the board list, but it's a peer-to-peer marketplace. We have about 700 CEOs and VCs that have nominated about 2,000 women to the board list. And that's 2,000 women from across the world who are looking for board opportunities largely within the tech industry. Though we see a lot of companies that are outside the tech industry who come to the board list and are looking for a digital director. And on the other side of it, in our first year, we've had about 150 companies looking for board members. Through our first anniversary now, we're about a year and a half old, and we've had about 200 companies come through so far. So here's what's in demand. What's in demand is anybody on the demand generation side. So marketing is in demand. It shouldn't be a surprise because if you think about what private companies struggle with, what do you think the number one issue is for a private company? Customer acquisition, growth. So if you think about the skill sets that are in demand, and largely a way to think about boardrooms is they do largely function looking for specialists, right? So they are looking for, there's different tracks that you should think about and, inside that boardroom. The specialist is an industry or a skill domain, right? So in terms of industries and skills that are in demand, first of all, we see mostly skill set based. We see anything in kind of CMO, customer acquisition, customer retention, strategic customer management, product and engineering. Women who run product and engineering organizations are in big demand right now inside the board list. Women in finance in very big demand because companies that are later stage are looking to think about going public, having an audit committee. So when you think about that range. And then, so that's one archetype, right, is that archetype. So those skill sets. The other thing that boards are looking for, and this is the second archetype for a boardroom, is a sitting CEO or a sitting peer who is the GM of an organization and has scaled something, right? So they're looking to find somebody who's a peer to the CEO, which doesn't need to mean they have to be a CEO. They could be running a division of a larger organization with a bigger size P&L, right? But they've seen scale. They've seen problems. They've seen management. They've seen international, right? And then the third archetype is a mentor, right? Which is, this is the CEO who's been there, done that, and is now mentoring the next CEO who's, a CEO is looking for somebody who can be his mentor, right? Or her mentor, his or her mentor. And so I think that those are the three archetypes. So think about what archetype you fall in. So if it's domain-based, which is where a lot of demand is, once again, I'll ask you, at what are you a strategist? What skill, domain, specifically functional expertise do you bring? Where top to bottom, you can think about execution and you can think about strategic issues. Number two, have you scaled something? To what degree, of what size, what level of management challenge have you seen? And international is in particular demand. And then lastly, have you been there, done that? Have you already scaled something, and you can be truly a mentor to somebody who's going through that process. So beyond that, what are the X factors? Culture fit with the CEO, probably one of the biggest elements in deciding whether to take a board, and quite frankly, in a board deciding whether you're a fit, right? Comes down to everything else, right? Beyond competencies, it's all about culture fit, right? So culture fit with the CEO, and you feel like this is a person whom you can assist, and them feeling like this is a person from who they can garner value. So being an influencer versus an operator is one of the X factors people look for. So on the one hand, they're hiring you for your knowledge, right? On the other hand, the CEO isn't really looking for you to come and tell him how to do his job. He's, a founder may be looking for you to roll your hands up and get in there with his management team and get very operational. But by and large, the bigger the company gets, the more they're looking for you to know how to influence, meaning you have a POV, you know how to bring it, you know how to influence, and you know when to back off, right? You know how to be an influencer rather than operator. So I think that's piece two. What else do you think is important too? What other X factor are they looking for? Yeah, perspective for sure. This is, I think the way I would rephrase that is knowing what role you play in the boardroom, right? So boardrooms are constructed with people designed to play specific roles. That doesn't mean you can't comment on something you don't know about. That's a perspective too, right? But they're looking for educated perspectives, and one of your jobs in the boardroom is to say, like, why am I here? What am I meant to contribute, right? So I think it's about perspective and knowing specifically what your role might be in the boardroom. I think the couple other things I would note that may be less obvious. Number one, gravitas, presence. Right. This is this is an X factor kind of element, right? Why are people looking for gravitas or presence? Because you're sitting in a room of other senior people, right? They want you to be able to hold your weight, hold your opinion, right? Sit inside of a room and be taken seriously and with credibility. So gravitas tends to be, or presence, the way you carry yourself, is an X factor, right? One of the things we tell people at the board list all the time, all the time, and I think we'll end up doing a clinic on it, is go take a look at your picture, right? What does it say about you? Like, if you have a picture that's from the 80s, no offense, no matter how good your experience, you're not reading as really relevant to today's economy, right? Okay, think about your picture. It's an example, right? Think about what else your picture says about you, right? So I think that, and then beyond the picture, of course, in the interview, once again, you're expected to be sitting in a group of senior people and be influencing. So thinking about the presence you convey, how you hold yourself, that is an X factor that I think is really important because you're expected to be there. Again, it doesn't mean you have to be a CEO, but it means you need to carry yourself in a way that earns the respect of senior people, whether they're board directors, ex-CEOs, CEOs, other VPs, it doesn't matter. So I think that's one important one. And the last one comes back to the culture fit point, which is it's not just about the culture fit with the CEO, it's about the culture fit with the rest of the board. So often you're getting interviewed not just by the CEO, but by other board members. And what they're looking to see again is that they can gel with you. What's the worst person to have in a boardroom? A downer. That's one. Yeah, Michelle, that's nice to see you again. That is actually one. I share that in common with you. I have a downer sometimes on my board, and that's pretty tough. So that's one. What's another difficult thing to have in the boardroom? If you're a board member, hit the nail on the head, right? So somebody who doesn't know how to moderate themselves in that environment and steers the conversation 5 ways to Sunday, right? It's the same as in an executive meeting, right? Like the person who takes the conversation on some tangent and is like a dog with a bone and overtakes, think about how that disrupts a boardroom. So one of the things that board members really don't want, they want constructive perspectives and influence. They really don't want a derailer, right? And they really don't want somebody who is just there to hear themselves speak and show everybody else how smart they are, as opposed to contribute to a dynamic. So these are some of the other things you need to think about when you're thinking about positioning yourself for a board. So I'm gonna finish up on 2 last things. One common theme is networking, right? The other is, who do you let know that you're interested in a board opportunity, right? And I think you cannot be shy in letting people know that you're interested in a board opportunity and thinking about who has tapped into your knowledge or wanted to tap into your knowledge in the past. Where may you be on the advisory board? Where maybe one of the things you want to do is actually get on the board, right? And if you have a relationship at the advisory board level, maybe it is worth asking, right? Or testing the waters on sort of when there might be a board opening. So I think that working your network is one obvious way, and I think that's probably the thing to most think about. I will tell you the other key thing to think about is when asked, to take the conversation, right? Lots of times people worry about sort of, what if I don't want to take this board? Should I take the interview? So if you get the call, take the meeting, right? You can always say, I'm not sure if I'm going to take this board or not, and as long as you're honest with people, use it as an opportunity to learn, to discover. Right now I sit on the board at Ericsson, right? How many of you think I went out looking for a technology communications infrastructure board? I run a retail fashion company, right? I didn't, right? But the size of the business challenge and the business opportunity and the global kind of span of that board is so fascinating, right? And there's so many interesting issues that they have to deal with that are, quite frankly, are similar to issues I dealt with at Google, or issues I might deal with at TripAdvisor, which is where I'm on a board as well, or even at Joyus, right? So you just never know, right, where opportunity is going to come. And I think it is about, whether or not you can get excited about the challenge and about the scope of the problem, right, and feel like you have a unique perspective to add. So beyond networking, take the meeting. And then lastly, what does success look like once you're inside the boardroom? So how do you, we'll finish up for just a moment by just talking about how do you think about being your most impactful? So we touched on this already. I just want to recap a few key points, and then we can wrap up. Number one, when you're in the boardroom, obvious, be prepared, right? So one of the challenges in private company boards versus public company boards is often the founder himself may not be prepared. You may not get the materials the night before, right? But as a board member, if you get the materials, read them, right? As you get more familiar, if you want to be more impactful in the boardroom, maybe ask for them the night before, right? There are opportunities for you to get prepared ahead of any board meeting. Those are obvious. Number two, right? Thinking about your role that you're there to play, and thinking about that balance that we talked about between sort of what is your role to play and where can you offer perspective, and how do you think about honing your influence skills and really being in the room and being part of the discussion without needing to drive every discussion. And then knowing, quite frankly, the opposite, where you have a unique perspective to provide, and it is your job, to come down strong with a opinion that you think is really required, right? So it's not about not feeling free to dissent, not feeling free to vocalize a strong opinion. It's about, again, knowing your role and knowing when you want to be an influencer and when there's one or two areas for which you really are there strategically, right? And you have a depth of knowledge on a topic that maybe somebody else in the room doesn't have. And it is your responsibility to bring that to bear, right? That's what success looks like. My most important message to you all is sort of finishing up where we started, which is it is a really personal journey. We talk to women at the board list who are board ready, who sit on 4 boards, and we talk to women who are thinking about boards 5 years down the road, right? If you're starting to think about it, I would say one easy way to start is thinking about nonprofits. That's where I got my first board experience. It's a great way to get board experience. You'll quickly find that any board experience is good board experience. So if you're trying to make your way to a for-profit board or for a public board, they value nonprofit experience because, again, it's taught you how to be in a boardroom, and the dynamics are very similar, even if the requirements, are different. So I would say if you're thinking about it, think about where you might want to contribute, what topics you're passionate about. Thinking about the advisory board role, if there's a company you're interested in, is another way to go. Certainly with private companies, one of the most amazing things is, it really is a pretty open community, and if you think you have something to add, you can approach the CEO of a private company board and offer or ask if there's an advisory board opportunity. That's another way to make your way to the board you might want. And thirdly, like I said, be prepared, get your resume, your board resume ready. That's a whole other topic, and if you want to sign up and learn about that, the board list, we run clinics on that. We'd love to help you think about how to get kind of board ready from sort of creating your own profile online. But most importantly, network. Tell the people you know what you're interested in. And I would just say be open to all the opportunities you see, right? Because it's a really fascinating and I think definitely a career-enhancing journey, and one which I hope that if you want to be on is available to all of you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. For more information on Women in Retail Leadership Circle, please follow us at Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest at WIR Leadership. Until next time, this has been Women in Retail Talks.